So, the Quran says that God wants to enter into a relationship with humanity, and that this human experience will definitely produce a certain segment that will relate to him. So here I am, I'm done with the Quran, and I'm trying to think, what could the possible connection be? So what's the natural place to look? Well, if it has to do with a relationship between God, we should look in the Quran what the Quran expects from man and what the Quran tells us of God, and then we should try to see if there's any relationship between the two. I mean, that seems like a natural thing to do. Because if the issue comes down to relating to God, we should discover in the Quran what it says about the believers and the disbelievers, those who are brought near to God and those who are not, and God, and see if there's any possible connection between the two. Okay, so what does the Quran expect from mankind? Well, it's so simple in the Quran, it's almost the type of thing you just like to just read over and neglect. It says God expects, of people that they believe, that they will believe and do good. What? Believe and do good? Okay, I get the believe part. If you're going to have a relationship with God, you certainly must believe in Him. You can't just reject Him, to turn your back on Him. Reject His very existence, definitely. But what does doing good have to do with forging a relationship with God? You want us to make us good, whatever. But even so, what difference does it make? So I looked up what kind of acts the Quran said are good. I just wrote a partial list. I didn't look them up. I just tried to remember from my reading of it. And not unexpectedly, it consists of those acts and attributes that are sort of universally recognized as virtuous. Good deeds are such, for example, we should show compassion to others. We should be merciful. We should forgive others. We should be just. We should protect the weak, defend the oppressed, feed the poor, seek knowledge and wisdom, be generous, truthful, kind, peaceful, and love others. And we should teach others these same things and learn them and grow in them as well. But why? In one verse it says, truly those who believe and do good will the most merciful endow with love. And to this end we have made this easy to understand in your own tongue, so that you may convey this glad news to the God-conscious and warn those given to contention. You're supposed to grow in love of your fellow man. But why? I had not a clue, but I did list them. Hope I could get here without sabotaging this. Somebody left their glasses here. Okay, so we're supposed to grow in love of our fellow man. You probably can't read this anyway if you're way in the back. Compassion. This is very small. Love, right? Compassion. Forgiveness. I just, listed them. I had nothing else to do that day. I was watching a football game. Love, compassion, forgiveness, caring, justice, truth. What are some of the other ones I said? Protect the weak. Protective of the weak. Kindness. Forgiveness. What did I leave out? Mercy. Mercy, compassion, etc. Compassion. I got compassion. Okay. It wasn't very helpful, but I wrote them down. Okay, but I didn't complete my project. Okay, what does the Quran tell us about God? Now this is where it gets tricky. Because the Quran tells us, and naturally it's so, that nothing compares with God. That He is beyond rational definition, or even understanding, I would assume. Nothing compares to Him. Reason cannot encompass Him. If all the trees were pens, and all the sea, and the sea was ink, and 7 seas like it, ink as well, you could never exhaust the words of God, the Quran tells us. You could never, in your reason, encompass Him. And what good does that do me? Here I'm trying to see the connection between us doing good and our relationship with God, and there better be an intrinsic connection or I'm walking from this Quran. Well, I didn't believe in God at this point anyway. But there better be an intrinsic connection or the author has failed to guide as he said he would. But God is incomparable. We cannot come to know God. We hardly understand the human mind. How can we understand God? How can we come to know God? I could come to know you, because I have some sort of connection to you. We are alike. I could approach you physically, because you're a physical creature. I could walk over to you. Don't get scared. All right? I just move my body closer to yours. I could approach you rationally, through the intellect, right? By discussion and argumentation and so forth, right? By the exercise of reason. I could approach you guys, any of you, in terms of feelings, right? By appealing to your emotions, right? Because we share them both. But in order to approach somebody, you've got to approach them by what they are. We could come to understand another because we share something. We approach a creature or a being, we approach a being by what they and we are. But how do you approach God? We're finite, He's infinite. We're corporeal creatures, He's incorporeal. Right? We're limited to this time and space environment, He transcends it. You know, just about anything you could think of that we possess, He possesses it to an infinite degree, transcends that. We don't compare. How can we come to know God? How can we have this relationship you talked about? Sorry, there's just no answer to that. No, there is, of course. But that's the way I felt. Sorry, there's no answer to it. And so I left the Quran. I finished reading it. I put it down. And about 2 weeks passed. I don't know what I was doing one day. I was sitting, thinking about something totally removed from religion. And then I thought, wait a minute. The Quran does provide us some information about God. But I had neglected it, ignored it, time and time again. There are thousands of descriptions in the Quran about God that I just had never seen. If I just opened to the beginning of any surah, or looked on almost any page and came to the completion of a verse, I would have found many, many such references. You know, all the Muslims, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about. Because throughout the Quran, time and time again, punctuating passages, crowning passages, beginning surahs, you find what the Quran refers to as the beautiful names of God. You can't miss them. And they tell us something about God, right, for our benefit. And as I thought about them in my head, I began to list them in my head. The beautiful names of God. And I thought about them in my head. What are they? God is the loving. God is the compassionate. God is the forgiving. God is the caring. There's dozens and dozens of them. God is the just. He is the truth, or the truthful. He is the protector. He is the kind. God is the forgiving. Just read through the Quran. You can't miss these. He is the merciful. And on and on and on. I didn't complete this list, and I didn't complete this one either. But I looked in my mind at the two lists I visualized for the qualities God wants us to develop and the qualities that the Quran uses to describe God. And then I just immediately saw the picture. So what the author was telling us. Because the author is telling us that yes, your reason may not be able to fully encompass God, but you are to grow and learn love. Grow in your ability to learn and show love. Why? Because God is the loving. The more you grow in compassion, the more you come to receive and experience and understand God's infinite compassion. Because the Quran lets us know that all compassion ultimately comes from God, originates from God. The more you grow in forgiveness, the more you come to receive and experience and to know the forgiving, who is God. The more you grow in your ability to care for others, the more you grow in your experience of and understanding of and ability to know the caring. You don't reach it through reason, you reach it through experience. Same way I understand you in this audience. I don't know you rationally. I know you because we share common experiences. God is the caring, infinite source of caring according to the Quran, but we could grow in our ability to care for others. The more we grow in justice, the more we come to understand, experience, and to know the just. The more we grow in truth, the more we come to know, experience, and represent the truthful. And the Quran says we're here to represent God. The more we know of protectiveness of the weak and the downtrodden, the more we come to know the protector. The more we know of kindness, the more we come to know, experience, and receive the beauty that only the kind could give us. Forgiveness, forgiving, merciful, merciful, compassionate, compassionate, and on and on. When I explained that to my daughters, they said, "Daddy, what are you trying to say?" And I told them this. I said, pretend that we have a dog, some goldfish, and 3 daughters. Pretend that. I do have 3 daughters. So at least they could relate to that. I told them, no matter how much of my love, no matter how much of my compassion, no how much of my comparing, how much of my real self I shower on that goldfish could only experience my love, my compassion, my caring, my justice to a very limited degree. Because it's a very primitive creature. It only knows and could learn and could experience love, compassion, forgiveness, etc. to a very minuscule level. But my dog, Rex, I don't have a dog, but I had one, Rex, once. But my dog, he could know and experience and feel my love, my compassion, my caring, myself, my being, to a much higher level. Because he's a more developed creature. He knows through his own life experiences, he experiences through his own life experiences a certain amount of love, compassion, forgiveness, not just as a receiver, but as a giver as well, which is more important. Because when you give love, you're experiencing loving on a whole nother level than just receiving. You're learning it. But I told her, look at you 3 guys. Look at you 3 guys, I said to my daughters. As you grow, you will come to learn, know, and experience love, compassion, forgiveness on a much higher level, and a higher level. And it's up to you how high you want to go. But the more you grow in love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, etc., the more you could experience whatever love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, etc., that I have to give to you. The more you could experience me, the more you could experience my being. And that's essentially what the author seems to be telling us. That the more we grow in all these, the more we could experience the infinite love, compassion, forgiveness, caring, justice that is God. And so all the pieces were coming together for me. All I had to do was just read any page of the Quran. There were times and times again, there were signs. It was staring me right in the face. Except that I read it and never opened my eyes to see it. And it took me reading the entire scripture before it was open to me. But wait a minute, I said. Okay, granted. The more we grow in love, the more we could experience God's loving. The more, and people do. The believers, they experience it in prayer. They experience it in ritual. They talk about those powerful moments when they experience God's presence. They do experience it. And the Quran promises that you will definitely experience it to some degree in this life, but in the next life, when all distractions are swept away. And all you take to the next life is your growth in these, your real person. If you have grown in these, if you haven't become bankrupt in these, you will be able to experience God's beauty, His presence, His being to higher and higher degrees. But I thought, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I almost got lured, seduced into accepting this picture. I almost got seduced into accepting this picture, but then I remembered my questions. And I remembered the angel's question. I mean, wait a minute, guys. Why didn't God just program these in us? Why didn't He just program us to be loving, compassionate, forgiveness, etc., instead of making us go through this turmoil, this torture on earth? Are you following me? And why didn't He just program us to be that way? Was the suffering all necessary? Was the pain of it all necessary? Did I gain anything from my childhood? I mean, what did I learn? Why did I have to suffer? You know, why do you have to suffer? Why did He give me choice? Why did He give me intellect? Just make me love. Just make me have compassion. Just like that. Well, if you read the Quran, don't even read the Quran. Just think about it yourself. You know, in order to grow in love, and as creatures, the Quran says, every creature grows. Creatures are growing entities. And the Quran says that God provides every creature with the environment, the soil, if you will, the environment, the growing environment that is necessary for its growth. But if we are to grow in love, compassion, forgiveness, caring, etc., how does that contribute to that environment? Are these necessary ingredients for us to grow in these, and us to develop these, and us to learn these and acquire these? And I think if you think about it for a minute, the answer is obviously yes. I mean, think about compassion, for example. How can you have compassion if there is no suffering? If there is not some vulnerable creature to turn to? If some creature is not dependent on you? How could you exercise, learn, and grow in compassion? Unless you are the infinite source of it already, which none of us are, since none of us are God. We are creatures, we become. How can we become compassionate without knowing vulnerability, weakness, suffering in others that we could turn to? What is compassion without choice? A compassionate act is an act where you choose to help someone, when you have the option not to. If I take a banana, eat it, take the peel, throw it over my shoulder, it lands in the street, a criminal comes by on his way to rob a pocketbook from an old lady standing over there and trips on the banana peel and falls on the ground, my throwing the banana peel over my shoulder was not a compassionate act. Because I really didn't choose to do that. Compassionate act requires choice. It also requires intellect. Because when you reach out to someone in compassion, you weigh in your minds how much of yourself you're going to invest in reaching out to that person. And you say to yourself, do I really want to do this? How much time is it going to require? I got to go to work. I might not make any money today. Besides, I'll have to be helping this person for the next couple hours. Have to take him to the hospital. See him. Your mind is weighing how much of yourself is going to be invested in that. You could program a computer to never make an incorrect statement, but it doesn't become a truthful computer. I never heard anybody say to me, Jeff, you know that computer of yours? It's the most truthful computer I've ever seen. Because truth is not just making correct statements. Being truthful is a choice. It's understanding the decision you're making. It requires intellect. And if that truth involves you in the possibility of suffering, the more that is in stake in telling the truth, the greater you rise to that truth, the greater that is an act of truth. Oh, sorry. Because I was going like this. All right. What else do I have written here? Forgiveness. is a choice. What is forgiveness without choice? What is forgiveness if somebody can't wrong you, which produces suffering? What is forgiveness without intellect? If you don't understand what the person has done to you, what the person is saying when they ask you for forgiveness. All these things, suffering, choice, and intellect, are integral to our growth in these. Are you following me? One last example, the famous wedding vow. You promise to stick with somebody in sickness and in health. What's the other one? I said it so long ago I can't remember. In sickness and health, for richer or for poorer, until death do we part. It asks us to make that commitment. It acknowledges the essential element of suffering and growing in love. And it's a choice. We make that vow. That vow is a choice. Do you, Jeff Lang, promise to take Ragya, so forth, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and health? I start thinking about it. Wait a minute now. No, I didn't. I was very pleased to do that. But it was a choice. And it's giving you the choice. Understand this. When you make that vow, it's in sickness and health, richer or poorer, till death, do you part. It's saying, think about it. Understand what kind of choice you're making. No, these three things are integral in our growth in these. Suffering, choice, intellect are absolutely necessary to grow in these. You pull anyone out of this equation called life, and we don't have it as we know it. We cannot grow in these as we know it to very high levels. Finally, in the last 2 minutes, I'll just simply say this. So when the Quran talks about sin, it talks about people who grow bankrupt in these, more or less. The Quran, a famous symbol in the Quran is the balance on the day of judgment that weighs your goodness. And people are heavy in goodness. People who are full of goodness, they can experience paradise in the next life. And perhaps, to greater and greater degrees, God's presence. Because the more we know of goodness, the more we grow in goodness, the more we are able to experience, receive, and know the infinite goodness of God. But what if we go the opposite direction? What if instead of developing the qualities of love, compassion, forgiveness, caring, we do just the opposite? We head in the opposite direction. When we become, instead of being heavy in these qualities on the day of judgment, we become extremely light in these qualities when we enter in the next life. So instead of becoming loving, we become hateful, compassionate, miserly, forgiving, vengeful, caring, whatever, mean, justice, cruel, I don't know, truth, liar, protective, destructive, and so forth. What if we go in the opposite direction and become primarily those? Well, then we are just, as the Quran says, destroying yourself. Because if you're bankrupt of those, then this, growth in this, will be the only thing that matters as you go into the next life. You bring nothing else with you but what you really are. And if you have not developed this, then you're going to suffer severely because you cannot experience any of the beauty that awaits you in the next life. You'll experience just the opposite. As the Quran compares growth in this life, our physical growth in the womb, to our spiritual growth in this life. And if you think about it, when a creature grows in the mother's womb, it's a primarily physical growth. When it comes into this life, when it is born, you see the effects of that growth concretely right before you. When a child enters this world, the growth it went through in a womb, its physical growth, is manifested before you in that creature's being. But what the Quran seems to suggest is that when we are the type of spiritual growth we obtain in this life, when we go into the next life, it too will be manifested in exactly what we are. And so to go in this next life bankrupt of these is like coming into this life bankrupt, bereft of every physical quality you need to experience some peace, some joy, some comfort in this life. So if you are bereft of these, it would be like coming into this life without any skin to protect you from the cold or the heat, with your nerves exposed and all you know is pain, the inability to breathe and you're gasping for air. I'm not trying to scare any of you, I'm just presenting an analogy. Choking for your breath, blind, you cannot see. And the Quran says the spiritually blind in this life will come out blind in the next life to reality. So to not grow in these, to grow in the opposite, to become basically evil, is, according to the Quran, self-destruction. And so when the Quran speaks of sin, it frequently says, you don't sin primarily against God. You don't even primarily sin against your victims. The Quran says the sinner primarily commits sin against themselves. They destroy themselves, the Quran says. And it says God gives you every, at least when He exposes you to the Quran, gives you every possible warning about that. And then it says, and still they turn their backs.